Andy Davis is joining me from Trig Electronics, Trig Avionics, and Andy, you've got a new program that you've set up that you announced the show. So tell us a little bit about your Express Lane dealer program.
Yeah, we're calling it Express Lane, and it's a way of getting dealers for targeted customers to give them a real quick way of upgrading their airplane to give them ADS-B out. There's a whole lot of different choices out there for different kinds of equipment and different configurations, and different vendors have different ways of approaching that. One of the things we have is the advantage of a transponder-based solution for ADS-B out that is a true plug-and-play, slide-in replacement for an existing transponder. In fact, for the KT-76A, 76C, 78A, which is the most popular transponder out there. So there's lots of airplanes flying with those legacy Mode AC transponders that are eligible for a straightforward swap to turn it, first of all, into a Trig Mode S transponder panel mount. If they also are fortunate enough, and by the way, a lot of them are, to have a legacy Garmin navigator, like one of the GNS 430Ws, does have to be the WAS model, or 530W, or if they have one of the newer GTN range, then there is compatibility between those navigators as a GPS position source and the transponder. Wire the two together, and you have a complete ADS-B solution. The actual install is I hesitate to say trivial, because there's pre-test, qualification, wiring, post-install test, so there is complexity, but it's a couple of wires added and some configuration work required to get you going. So we estimate that using our AML STC for this process, the dealer should be able to do a complete install in 5 to 8 hours.
Okay.
If you're really lucky and your airplane is in wonderful condition and everything's just accessible, you might even beat that time. But there's some flexibility in there for pretty much any straightforward installation to be done.
So you did mention that it's on an AML, so you've got
Yep.
a whole list of airplanes
absolutely.
that are eligible.
There's about 650 types on the
Okay.
AML, so pretty much anything that's out there. The thing that's enabled this is some software changes that we've made in the transponder that ease that installation process a little bit, and also make it a much more straightforward installation of what's called the air-ground determination. There's a requirement in ADS-B that some kind of detector, squat switch, airspeed switch, whatever is used to indicate whether you're flying or on the ground, because the ADS-B messages are different. With our latest software in the TT31, a set of algorithms based on GPS data allows that to be done automatically by the transponder, and therefore there's no additional wire adds, cuts, changes that the installer has to do.
So where are your dealers here in the United States?
Oh, everywhere. If you go on our website, there's a dealer lookup page where you can search by geography and find the dealer nearest to you. On that website, there's also a page that does the pre-qualification for Express Lane. The dealers are really pleased with this, because it lets the customer go and follow a simple questionnaire that says, do you have this, do you have this, and it tells them whether or not they're likely to be an Express Lane customer. If they're not, then of course they can still speak to a dealer and say, I have this issue, I'd need to swap this out or change this, or I happen to know my altitude encoder is broken and doesn't work, and clearly these add extra stuff, but go through the questionnaire, get to the end, take you to an Express Lane dealer, and they'll be able to do an upgrade on that airplane.
So how is this affecting the 2020 mandate installs that you're seeing? Obviously you've offered this service, at least in my mind, to really help pilots and owners get into compliance by that deadline.
Yeah, that's correct. It's a well-known fact that there is a timetable issue. If you look at the rate at which the installations are going, they're going. I mean, they're going.
Yeah.
And divide out the number of months left until the end of the deadline, you can see that we're not going to get there. And there's going to be a shortfall in the aircraft that are equipped come 1st of January 2020. And so, so we did this specifically so that we could speed up that process. It's going to make it easier for installers. It's going to lower the bar a little bit to get the aircraft owners in, especially those who are just trying to get a basic compliance system. Obviously, if you want to add extra features to your airplane, more toys to the panel, change other parts of the avionics, that's not an Express Lane installation.
Right.
But for the guy who just wants to get compliant, this is the way to go.
Now there's a similar mandate in Europe. Are you offering the program, since we're on the World Wide Web after all, are you offering the program over in Europe as well?
Well, to be honest, there is not a similar mandate in Europe. The mandate in Europe is for the commercial air transport airplanes, the IFR traffic in controlled airspace. It isn't anything like the same broad mandate that there is here in the US. So the typical GA aviator in a Part 23 airplane is not worried about the mandate in Europe because it won't affect them. There is some voluntary equipage going on, and people who have the equipment clearly are happy to wire that up. And our STC is also validated in Europe, so that people can do it optionally in Europe, but there isn't anything like the same pressure.
I learned something today.
There you go.
Always appreciate that, Andy. Now, you did bring a couple of show and tell items.
I did, yeah. I brought a couple of almost identical gold boxes. These are our TN72 GPS position sources. It's something we've been promoting for a little while now with some new news in the way that it's positioned and the way that we're talking about that. We mentioned ADS-B and the mandate. The mandate, of course, applies in specific airspace, the letter airspace, and in the Mode C Vale and around the larger airports. There are, however, some people who are exempt. One set of people who are exempt is sailplanes, along with balloons and airplanes with no electrical system at all. But it actually turns out that some of those people want to participate. A modern sailplane actually carries quite a lot of avionics sometimes. And a lot of those guys have trig transponders. It's very popular in that market, but want to take it to the next level and participate in an ADS-B solution, but they don't want to go the whole hog and have a full 91225, 91227 solution in their airframe. They just want to be visible for a traffic awareness point of view. And so the FAA came up with this thing called TABS, Traffic Awareness Beacon System, which is a TSO C199, but is a lower level of compliance with the ADS-B rule set. And Trig has responded, and we have a thing called the TN72 TABS GPS position source. It meets all of the TABS requirements. It can be partnered with your existing Trig transponder, any of the Trig transponders, and fitted to the kinds of airframes that are doing voluntary equipage.
Right.
Actually, it can be fitted to a Part 23 airplane as well if you wanted, but you have to understand that what does not get those access into the airspace because they weren't exempt.
Right.
There is another version of the same product, which we call the TN72X. The TN72X is essentially the same hardware platform, but configured in a different way. What it does is it actually allows the experimental and light sport guys to comply with the 2020 mandate. It's a $399 position source, which can be mated with any Trig transponder and give an experimental airframe the full 2020 compliance. It's experimental only because at that price point, quite frankly, we can't afford to do all of the certification and STC work that would put it into a Part 23 airplane. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't meet the technical standards. Indeed, it meets all of the performance requirements. We just don't give it an AML STC support to carry it into those airframes.
Let's talk about that for a minute, because there's a great deal of interest in non-certified equipment like this going into certified airplanes. Is this one of those things that might be eligible for such a program down the road as you look at perhaps being able to put that piece of equipment in a certified airplane?
It might be. I will say that we have explored that with the FAA to see what additional evidence they would need, because you said uncertified, and of course technically I'd have to correct you and say what happens is they were certified. They were certified through an STC process and a PMA process instead of being certified through a TSO process. But a lot of the things that you're referring to, they still had all of the same evidence presented to the FAA from a design assurance point of view, from a technical compliance with the MOPS and so on. And the same would apply to this product as well. We would have quite a lot of work to do to demonstrate that. And I'll be honest, we priced it because we wanted to do that. We came up with a number, we divided it by the number that we thought we might sell, and said, you know, that will spoil the price proposition. of course I could do that, but I might have added, and I might have more than doubled the price of it, and then suddenly it's not quite so compelling anymore. Because in fact, I have other solutions in a slightly bigger gold box that are already fully certified, and so to keep some fresh air between the two, we just choose not to do that.
You know, things are getting smaller and smaller and smaller.
Yep.
It seems like every year that we come to this show, you come with a box that next year's box may be half that size.
It may be small. Yeah, it's funny you say that. In practice, of course, the installers want flanges that they can actually attach useful screws to. They quite like D-type connectors because they have the tools and the crimps to put them together, and with fat fingers, it's the kind of thing you can build. So there's a limit to how small something can get. Certainly in this, even the width of the box is set by the width of the connectors that you're going to put on the end of it. So,
but where I'm going with that is that you're also getting into some of the UAV market as well.
We are, yep.
Is there anything you can talk about along those lines that we would find interesting?
I can talk along those lines, whether you find it interesting or not. So yeah, Trig has some products in the UAV space. What actually happens more in the UAV space is that our products are more integrated. So we have products which enclose. They have a transponder. They have an air data computer. They have a GPS navigation source. They are a full, obviously, transponder as well as doing the ADS-B out, all packaged into a single device, because then the UAV space can take one brick-sized item and say that's all of the certified avionics that you're going to need. And that's for the guys who are, of course, trying to play in the airspace.
Right.
Not talking about the little camera drones where the rules are, of course, below 400 feet and in sight and so on, and they are not participating in the airspace. We're actually involved in some programs where it's not so much a little quadcopter or something. It looks a whole lot more like an airplane with a fuselage and wings and a tail, and in some cases more than one engine. And yet it's still an unmanned system, and they have certified grade avionics because they're flying airways and being deconflicted with real traffic. And so there's some quite interesting experiments going on there.
But as we look at that smaller quadcopter space, and I know that the FAA is really interested in being able to know what aircraft that is and who owns it and all of those things. Are those things that you see coming down the road for companies like yours to be able to play in that market?
I'm going to be honest and say no.
Okay.
We see that for the very small sector, it's going to be different technology. The technology that's been deployed for surveillance of aircraft and communicating with aircraft is really fit for purpose for that, but is less obviously fit for purpose for that low altitude drone market. You wouldn't have the same coverage, you wouldn't have the same access, and in fact you do a lot better by looking at alternative technologies. There's quite a few projects going on using different bands, RF bands with different technologies, including there are vehicle-to-vehicle technologies being deployed at higher frequencies, which they're talking about using for the drones. The kinds of things that they're trying to use for self-driving cars to avoid each other, they can also use for drones to avoid each other in the low-level airspace. And we actually see there being those low-altitude air vehicles using their own network, speaking to each other, much more like cell phone technology, much more like that kind of thing. Occasionally for a transit or for a larger drone where you're going to pop up into airspace where you're going to meet civil aircraft. Now you need to interoperate and interact with the civil aircraft, and so that will then use more conventional technologies, 1090 megahertz, 978 megahertz that we're familiar with. Whether that's done directly from the airframe or by proxy using a TSB type service, ADSR type service, that's still being discussed.
There's always going to be more to discuss.
There certainly is.
But we are out of time, Andy, and I really appreciate you taking some time to stop by and chat with us. Always interesting, and we'll
it's been a pleasure.
see you around the place.
Yes, indeed.
Aero-News Network's coverage of the 61st Annual AEA International Convention and Trade Show, live from Las Vegas, is brought to you in part by the following sponsors.
Are you stall smart? Ever since Orville and Wilbur took to the skies, pilots have been taught that the more airspeed you have, the better off you are. But over the last 100+ years, we've learned that's not always the case. Take stalls, for example. The common belief is that if you have sufficient airspeed, the aircraft won't stall. The fact is, an airfoil always stalls at the same critical angle of attack in relation to the relative airflow, regardless of airspeed, configuration, or weight. Learn more at aspenavionics.com.
The 2-inch MD93 digital clock and USB charger features intuitive operation with 4 modes: local time, universal time, flight timer, and stopwatch. The dual USB charging port supplies 2.1 amps of power per port to personal electronic devices with a USB interface. Learn more at mcico.com.